Great. Great. Thanks very much, Martina. Sorry about your sound there. I'm sure you'll get it sorted. My name's Aileen. I'm the manager of the Grootvadersbos Conservancy, and I'm going to be talking about bringing rural livelihoods back to life through restoration. Just a little background on the Conservancy. The Conservancy is one of the oldest in the Western Cape, established back in '92 by local landowners in Cape Nature. But 11 years ago, we employed our first staff member, and we now employ over 10 full-time people and create employment for a range of different people in the area, about 120. And our activities mainly focus on alien clearing and restoration, but we're also involved in a whole lot of other initiatives in our area. We work a lot with partners. We are members of Conservation at Work, the CFRP, and more recently, the Africa branch of SIR. What I'm going to be talking about today is very much about alien clearing, but a slightly different aspect around alien clearing. And we often see pictures like this in terms of what alien clearing can do and facts and figures around the hectares that are cleared. But what I want to focus more about is on more of the socioeconomic aspects of alien clearing. So one of the things that is really important with alien clearing is the jobs that are created. And over the last 10 years, we've created over 100,000 days of employment, averages around 10,000 a day, 10,000 a year. We don't normally always reach those numbers, but we sort of strive to be around that. And creating businesses for 8 small businesses in the area of Swellendam, of Seerbrak, Bilfiaks, Barrydale, and Heidelberg. And 4 of these teams are female-led and owned. Now, the background to these programs come very much from the Working For model. And many of us know that started in '95 under the Working For Water, which evolved into other things like the Working For Wetlands, Working for Coast, Forest, Fire. And the estimated budgets for these programs is an outdated number coming from 2012, but you're looking at about 3.2 billion, which if you divide it by 9, and I'm not sure it's equally divided by 9, but that works out about 350 million for the Western Cape. An outdated number, but gives you an idea of the numbers we're dealing with. And that's certainly not enough to match the scale of the problem, but it is giving you an idea of how much money was involved. Hailed globally as a successful model for poverty relief and ecosystem protection, but has received quite a lot of local criticism for some aspects of the model. So what I'm going to reflect on is our perspective as implementers of this model over the last 10 years, what I feel the impact has been, and sort of where we are now and where we're going in terms of these models. So our experience, the Working For program really launched our Conservancy and was our core funding from 2015 to 2022. And I really feel that these programs are underhailed and under-recognized in terms of what they've contributed to the sector. Just in terms of the training, the standardization of methods, the knowledge that they've built up within the sector of alien clearing really is very impressive. We have an incredible network of contractors and implementers across the Western Cape and the country that really are very good at managing aliens because of these Working For programs. In some ways, it has also created a bit of a problematic legacy because these were very much government-funded programs. Many landowners still see this as a government problem. We still talk to landowners who think they're just waiting for those yellow T-shirts to come and solve this alien clearing problem, even though the legislation is very clear that it's a landowner responsibility. Because it was so heavily funded by government, we've been working very hard over the last years to change that mindset and to really bring landowners more closely into the picture and make them contribute a portion of the costs. Definitely challenging in terms of administration, delays in funding, and often inadequate resourcing for both the implementers and the contractors, and increasing audits and controls. And I'm going to talk to 2 specific examples of that, but I think it's important that we understand kind of the context of this model and some of the challenges that many of these teams operate in. So one example is just looking at our finances this is just a perspective on our funding over the last 10 years, since 2015, and you'll see that the orange bar is the Working For Water or Department of Environment. And you'll see that for the first 4 years, very strongly funded by the Department of Environment, and then 2019, suddenly that money disappeared, came back again, and then has disappeared again. And those ebbs and flows of funding are quite typical of these programs, and they do create real challenges for organizations like ourselves. And you can imagine also the contractors that are dependent on this funding. So you'd have a year in which you just don't get funding, and then you have to make other plans. And you also see that in 2025, which I'll talk more to, that funding no longer exists from the department. I want to talk now more about a different aspect of these challenges, And I'm talking about this just not so much to criticize the program itself, but just to understand kind of the legacy that it's created and some of the challenges that it presents to contractors. If I just explain how it would work in a typical financial year for us working in the space. If those of you who work in government, you'll know that March is when all government programs wrap up, and end of March, you finish all your contracts, and usually in April, government doesn't really issue much because they're kind of recovering from the financial year. We wouldn't be allowed to do much work in April. And then normally between May and August, there would be no kind of alien clearing work because the new contracts hadn't really been started yet. Usually by September, we would start to get MOUs going and these contractors would come online again. They wouldn't have worked for a long time. And then we would have to do some training with these contract teams. And this was always funded by the department to their credit. We'd have to make sure that all the teams had chainsaw operators, herbicide applicators, first aid, health and safety. We'd have to check all of these vehicles for compliance, all the equipment. We'd negotiate with the landowner. There'd be quite a lot of paperwork. And then we would issue with the contract which allows us to start working on site. That's when we engage with the contractor. There would be a competitive process of quoting, and we would negotiate with the contractors and, for example, give them a 10-day contract. We would check that they were compliant with health and safety, and then work would begin. Now, they haven't received any upfront funds, so now they have to find money to travel to site for 10 days to do this work, run their chainsaws, and employ people for 10 days. If nothing goes wrong, and of course it always does go wrong, you could have rain, and they're not allowed to work in the rain. You could have a health and safety incident, which means they have to leave. You could have fire. My favorite one is a guest house could say they need to leave site because the chainsaws are disturbing the guests. They have to come back when the guests leave. You could have extreme wind. The bucket could break down. So now they have to solve all those problems. And let's say they finish it after 10 days, and then the inspections start. Inspected by the landowner, by the implementer, and in some cases with a working order from an official from the Belleville office. That would require someone to go backwards and forwards to fix it multiple times until everyone approves it. And then there will be paperwork. DFFE pays the implementer, we pay the contractor pays the worker. Now, I'm not putting this up here to necessarily criticize. I understand many of the reasons why it was structured like this. But if you were to renovate your kitchen and you needed to bring in a contractor and you gave them these kind of terms and conditions, I'm pretty sure that the contractor wouldn't take the job. And what I find remarkable is that they probably wouldn't be in business for very long. But in our sector, these contractors have been operating with this type of model for over 30 years. And in many areas, it's actually, they're thriving. In other words, they're still doing exceptional work in the space. And we really don't acknowledge and appreciate the stress and the difficulties that some of these contractors have to work in. You have to be a very good contractor to be able to operate in the space. So what has happened since then? So a lot of this budget, as you saw in my first graph, has disappeared. So unfortunately, there's not a lot of funding happening within in this particular DFFE model. We were asked to quote and to respond to tenders for 3 different times. None of those tenders went through, and so no tenders have been issued by the Department of Environment for the last 2 or 3 years. And that had massive implications for many of these teams. But it's not all doom and gloom. These teams are still operating under a slightly different model, and that comes through under the Landcare funding from the Department of Agriculture. And we're very grateful for the support that this program now offers. It's a much smaller budget. I think it's important to note. I said about 350 million in 2012. The Western Cape budget from Landcare is only 50 million, coming through 17 irrigation boards. Built on very similar principles to what I presented, but it is a lot more flexible. It still has some of those challenges, but it is easier to manage and implement. But it's important for people to realize that within these programs, each year there's more audits and controls. There is always reduced contribution coming to us as implementing agents, and creating more stress for us to be able to co-fund these programs, because government is requiring more and more money to go directly to employment creation. So they're more reluctant to support the actual operators in running these programs, which means we need to reach out to landowners, co-funding and donations to cover our costs. And there's still those periods of no funding, which is a gap that affects us and affects, most importantly, the contractors. And each year, the costs increase and the amount we receive decreases, which means less work can be done within the sector. We're lucky, and Corné is going to speak more about this in the video we're going to show, talks about that. But because of the flexibility in this new land care model, as well as other resources we've been able to unlock, we're able to expand these teams more into active restoration. So these contractors are no longer cutting down trees. They are now getting involved in planting, restoration, nursery work, which is a really exciting area. But there isn't that same body of knowledge that's been built up over many years coming out of the working for water model. So it is challenging to manage some of these contracts because planting trees is very different to cutting them down. So what can we do, just in conclusion, I think, to kind of learn from this model and support it better? Well, I really do believe that we should celebrate these contractor teams and the work they do more. We always celebrate the volunteers that work on weekends, and we should, but some of these people have been doing this their entire lives and often don't get, I think, the credit they deserve. Value them as significantly important contributors to the restoration and the conservation world, and we have a huge amount to learn from them. Acknowledge their incredible entrepreneurial spirit in terms of how they continue to operate and operate very well in the space, and I don't think many of us could do that the way these guys operate. And engage with other service providers and implementers who work in there. If you're a volunteer working there, find out if there is a service provider, if there are teams, see how you can learn from them and work closely with them. And then find ways to possibly employ these teams when the government funding is stalled, because that really does help the sector as a whole if we can have more stability within these teams and learn from them. We're going to show a video, but I just want to emphasize that we really have these incredible teams out there that have been operating in this space thanks to the working for water models. They're highly skilled, they know their communities, they know the environment, and they're really deeply connected to it. And I think if we can support them better, through them we can really transform and protect rural livelihoods. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Aileen. Yeah. Apologies, everyone, for a bit of a shaky start and that my audio was faulty at the beginning of the webinar. But Aileen, I think you gave a great introduction to this topic, bringing land back to life and making that strong connection to people also. So Madeleine, I think we can show the video when you're ready.
Ek het nie die verskil geken tussen plante nie. Ek het nie geweet wat is inheemse, ek het nie geweet wat is uitheemse. En hierdie projek het regtig 'n groot impak op my lewe gehad. Nie net in die nie, maar ook persoonlik.
Never had a story of hope. This is a true story of hope in the Grootvadersbos Conservancy at the southernmost tip of Africa. So the Grootvadersbos Conservancy is situated on the Langeberg Mountain between Swellendam and Heidelberg roughly. We serve about 19 landowners and work in about 22,000 hectares of mountain catchment. This is a very special area. It's home to a lot of different and threatened ecosystems and fauna and flora. One of our biggest challenges is the alien vegetation in the area. They cause massive land degradation. Probably the most biggest one is the water consumption on a daily basis.
The Conservancy had been investing a lot of time into passive restoration, which is alien clearing, but they didn't have a lot of experience with active restoration, which is that there are environments that have been so transformed that without assistance, there won't be natural regeneration.
So we were lucky in 2022 to get the IKI Small Grants. It's a German-funded project that enabled us to start a restoration program alongside our existing alien vegetation program.
Toe hierdie projek begin, die restaurasie het in ek dink 2022 ek het gegroei. Ek sê altyd as 'n mens nie 'n passie vir iets het nie, jy moet 'n liefde hê. En ons het so lief geraak vir plante.
Some of the main challenges were the relationship that the people had with the environment. Even though many of the people within the project actually come from this area, they were disconnected. Their sense of why they were doing the work was also, it's a job. You know, it's a job, we get paid, we get here, we do it.
Ek het gevat 'n boom is net 'n boom. En 'n plant is net 'n plant. Ek het nooit die name geken of geweet of hulle belangrik is of nie.
So some of the aspects of the training that we did included all the stages of active restoration. So we started at the beginning with observing the natural environment and identifying ecology and ecosystems. Then we teach the implementation, the planting side. And then we do it practically as well in the field, where we start with putting out flags, and the team will go in and the flag matches the plant species, and then they go put the plants by the flags, and then we do a mass planting together.
Ek moet sê die impak wat die restaurasie vir ons gebring het is vir die feit dat ons soveel plante kon aanleer. Ek kan vir mense gesê dat hierdie is 'n inheemse plantjie en hierdie is 'n uitheemse plant. So ons is hier om die inheemse plante te beskerm. Altyd met soveel liefde.
Toe ek nou die nursery begin, toe sal ek uitvind. Hulle daarom name, hulle kan luister, ons kan gesels met hulle en alles. Ek is baie lief vir my plante.
Toe ek nou by Corneille kom weer, sê 2 jaar terug. Toe kom hier ek ook nog van saaitjies en ek is lief tot by my huis is 'n groot tuin. Maar ek het nie verstaan van ek kan daai saaitjie gaan vat en in die grond sit. Toe ek dit nou by hulle leer, toe doen ek dit nou by my huis ook. Nou dit ook 'n groot tuin. Nou my vetplantjies, buite en die pad lyk pragtig.
We really focused within this project to build relationship again. It really is about connecting to the plant on an emotional level. Maybe there's a story, maybe it reminds you of your childhood, and those were the things that we really wanted to bring in.
Toe ons nou hier kom weer toe my hart maar net oopgegaan. Ek wil net hier by die nursery weer, want ek kry gemoedsrus, die voeltjies sluit, maar ek wil net in die nursery weer.
Ek was so bevoorreg om mense aan te stel wat in haglike omstandighede geleef het, want werk was skaars. Ek kon dit wat ek geleer het in die projek kon ek met hulle deel.
Audrey absolutely loved this new opportunity for growth. And I think that was the spark that we saw in hers. She was immediately excited to not only learn new skills, but to give new opportunities to her team. She also realized that they've been working in nature for so long and they've been missing half of it.
Dit is in onze genen zeker, maar die veld en die groenigheid is in onze genen. Het is weer. Dat is mooi.
Really nice overview of the project and the impact on people from the Grootvadersbos Conservancy. Thank you, Aileen and Corneille, for sharing that. Aileen, I'm dialing in from my phone, so I'm having a bit of a difficulty to see if there's any questions in the Q&A, but I don't see any at the moment. So we can probably see if there's other questions that will be posted soon, and then we can see if you can answer them in between. But we're going to move over to our second speaker, so Corneille Brink. Corneille's already had some introduction through the video that we've shown everyone. And Corneille is the restoration manager for Grootvadersbos Conservancy, so she does work with the Conservancy, but she also is a private consultant under Carl Food Consulting. Corneille, so we look forward to what you have to share with us.
Thank you, Martina. Let me just share my screen. Can everyone see that?
Perfect, 100%.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you. So, as mentioned, my name is Corneille Brink, and I'm going to be touching on the interface and the similarities and challenges between the urban and rural ecological restoration landscapes. I'm going to give you just a brief background for those who don't know me. Then I'm going to dive into rural restoration, urban restoration, my very wholehearted opinion on the future of restoration in the Western Cape, and just a closing thought for us to part with. So, as mentioned, I've got my own small consulting business where I focus on the urban environment, everything from plant rescue to rehabilitation and restoration community gardens, those types of things. And then with the Grootvadersbos Conservancy, I have the privilege of working with Aileen and her amazing team on large-scale rural agricultural ecological restoration. I've been part of BOTSOC for many years now, privileged to hike and learn from Crew. I've got my nature conservation background. I was the curator of a botanical garden, and I also have my field guide qualification. So I pride myself in being able to look at restoration from all of these different lenses and approaches and see how they can inform one another for the benefit of all systems. So diving right into rural restoration, and these are really lessons that come from working with the Grootvadersbos team. Oftentimes, rural landscapes restoration projects are in large areas, very large landscapes that are still fragmented. And the challenges are always to the extent that they're invaded, the extent that they need to be restored, and the access. They are in high mountain areas and differing land uses right next to each other, causes a lot of challenges in actually getting to the site. Then when it comes to the maintenance and availability of these resources, again, the extent and the size of these locations and how far away they are poses a challenge in itself. Aileen, and even from the video, alluded to the challenges that we have with funding, and that there are gaps in the sustainability of the funding, and that there are seasons where there is no funding available for the contractors. And in rural areas, oftentimes these contractors and individuals will find jobs picking on farms, which means that you've trained someone for months, and then when it's time to actually implement on site, they're not available because they are living hand to mouth. And that obviously needs to be taken into consideration when getting the funding. When it comes to resources, a lot of these rural landscapes are so far away from nurseries, genetic material, that active restoration in itself becomes a challenge. And there is also the question of purism. Will you get plant material from 200 kilometers away so that you at least have indigenous species to outcompete the invasive species? Or will you use local genetic material, and how will you grow that? So the resourcing for these rural areas can be really costly, and often takes a lot longer because you are working with large areas. And this again ties into the funding that Aileen really eloquently spoke about. And then the security element is not as intense as in urban areas, but obviously land access is really important, and therein comes building a relationship with the landowners so that they allow you to get access to their land. Sometimes you just have to move through the land to the restoration site. And it's also important for them to take ownership, and through that, actually investing in the project, they have to pay a portion towards the restoration so that they can take ownership of the success in the long term. Other security issues are obviously once community members start understanding the value, intrinsic and economic value of some of these plant species, there is a potential for additional poaching, and fire and browsing are always issues with planting in the rural landscape. There are benefits though, and from a business point of view, restoration is a business that we should be looking at it in a sense that we should be making money from it and not just doing it for the love of what we do. But for a community, there are services that are derived from restoration projects, and they tie into the ecosystem services. So Ricardo was talking a lot about how the Grootvadersbos Conservancy works in the mountain catchments. And this is critical, as this is really where the water starts. And if we can ensure that these catchment areas are restored to their maximum capacity of holding water and filtering water, it will have a knock-on effect on all the other systems. Increasing soil health and biodiversity will also support agricultural yield. And again, the ecosystem services that are provided in the rural sector support the urban sector. And I think there's often this disconnect. People live in the city and people live in the farmlands and don't realize how interdependent we are on one another. From an economic point of view, there are a lot of employment opportunities. And once landscapes are looking beautiful again, there's also the opportunity for ecotourism. The education element comes into, as I mentioned in the video, it's really reconnecting the rural communities who have always been in connection with nature, reconnecting them to the value of what is around them, so that they don't feel the need to move to the city for a better life, because they understand the value of what they are protecting. And this ties into the sense of well-being that we receive from a healthy environment, and having that sense of stewardship and relationship with nature really is essential for people to see the value in protecting it and see the value in funding the protection of these landscapes. So moving on to urban restoration, which is really what I do in my consulting business. The reality is that the fragmentation is much more. The landscapes are a lot smaller. People are a lot more disconnected from the natural environment, and the green corridors are smaller pockets. Development is encroaching on rivers, and it's encroaching on green spaces, and areas are already highly transformed. They might be green, but they are riddled with invasives, and that in itself is a huge challenge, because again, going back to that puristic, are you going to take out the trees just because they're invasive, even though that's the only bit of green that is in the space? Then in terms of the maintenance challenges is oftentimes the lack of connection to the natural environment in the urban interface means that there really is no ongoing care once this space has been established. So it's essential that you have champions and people involved from the beginning that really feel a sense of connection, so that they can continue supporting the project. And ecologically ensuring that the system is sustainable in itself, so that if you have no one who can volunteer and maintain that community garden or the green space, that the ecology of the plants actually will support itself moving forward. Security is a huge issue, vandalism, theft, and safety. And really in urban restoration, the main thing is the human component. It has to be aesthetically pleasing. As I already mentioned, there are a lot of non-Indigenous species that people tend towards. It needs to be functional in serving the climatic conditions. There are higher rates of pollutants, herbicides, there's trampling, there's so many more pressures on a small fragmented urban site, and the site actually needs to be able to withstand that and be robust enough to withstand all of the pressures as well, while ticking the boxes for the humans in the area as well. At least there are some benefits to creating these spaces. And again, it comes back to mental health and the sense of well-being that we get from being in natural spaces. And I think that's what we need to hone in on when we create these spaces in an urban environment, providing a space for recreation and for reconnection to the wilderness. The opportunities for education here really are endless. I've just highlighted a few, as an outdoor classroom for schools, for communities and informal settlements where there are absolutely no trees and no greenery. urban restoration, green spaces are an opportunity for them to actually go and experience what it is like to sit in a park with wildlife and flowers. And these ecosystem services, in the terms of green belts or pockets or biodiversity gardens or wetlands or riparian edges, really play a role in cooling the city, in managing stormwater, in controlling erosion and invasive species. And in terms of economy, it does support the establishment of green jobs and landscaping industries. And I almost see it like a team of landscapers that just have a job every week to manage the green spaces indefinitely. So what is the future of restoration? Ultimately, we can't do it alone. We need to collaborate and we need to innovate. And the collaboration needs to be multi-sectoral, everything from NGOs like the Grootvadersbos Conservancy to Intaba from Yuhan and Sue, all the way to Cape Nature, SANParks, community volunteer groups. Networks like this where we are able to share information, practitioner meetings, training. And then again, the champions. Audrey, who you heard in the video, she is a champion who has been trained and is now training the following people. And having champions to spread the word is essential. And then employing people and ensuring that those people that are employed have the skills and the heart to understand why it is important to keep doing what they're doing. I see the future of restoration as a spider web. It is a spider web of practitioners, horticulturalists, nurseries, academics, policymakers, and together the web sustains everything that is the ecosystems from the urban to the rural. So that's basically my final slide to say, if Singapore can envision a city that looks like a jungle, I'm sure South Africa can as well. And there's a beautiful opportunity for us to move forward in a way that is innovative, that is traditional, and is also non-traditional. And I think taking hands really is the only way that we can make it work. So yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that wonderful insight or insights, Corné. I think really inspiring. I just want to go back. You can leave your camera on, but I would like to call Aileen as well, because there's just a question from Michael in the chat. Helen Potgieter's question was answered. Thank you, Aileen, about the availability of plants to the public from the Grootvadersbos Conservancy. But Michael is acknowledging or speaking to, given the struggle in government funding that Aileen also highlighted, what could be, the 5-year plan or the next plan over the next couple of years in terms of how we secure funding to continue the brilliant work that conservancies or organizations are busy with, such as the Grootvadersbos Conservancy. And perhaps, Aileen, if you could answer that, and Corné, I don't know if you want to make a quick input, you're also welcome to do that.
Thanks, Martina. Yeah, so I think it's always, any NGO always has to think out of the box and be creative. In fact, that video that you just saw is just a new campaign that we're launching in partnership with Love Green. It's actually the first time we've shown it, to really kind of branch out for donations and contributions for the work that we're doing, to broaden that beyond just government contributions and the landowners. So that's one of the campaigns we're working on. And then with Corné, we're also kind of brainstorming ideas of looking at wholesaling plants, services in terms of restoration. We really want to try and build more sustainability into our models. But yeah, and we will always still be looking for donations and international contributions to our work. But these days you have to have multiple sources of funding. You can't just rely on one stream of funding. I don't know if you want to add to that, Corné.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add is the sustainability of a nursery is challenging under the best of circumstances. And so in terms of restoration, there's almost an added layer to that. So as Aileen mentioned, we are looking at different avenues, and that's one of the things that has been highlighted in my career is most places throughout the Western Cape, there's a very limited availability of locally indigenous plants, endemic species, and that is potentially an avenue to generate enough interest for funders and then enough value financially through the sale of those species for restoration projects into the future. So brainstorming. That's
a lot of people, plants, and partnerships. Thank you, Corné, for that, and thank you also to Aileen. We're going to move on to our third speaker, Johan van Biljon. So Johan van Biljon is the CEO of Intaba Environmental Services, working mostly in the Woolsley and Tulbagh area. Johan, when you're ready, you can switch on your camera and share your presentation with us.
Okay, hello. So I hope everything goes right now.
That's great. We can see you. We can see
Johan,
the
I think you are
slides.
sharing your, just go full display. It's now
Yeah.
on the preview. I think you need to swap the displays.
Where did it go now?
Now you're sharing your, just go full display again, and then make sure that you're on the, not the presenter view, but the, try again.
Okay, what can you see now?
It is still the preview, but if you're comfortable like that, you can proceed, but it is the presenter view.
Okay, no, I don't know how to change this now.
Okay.
I suppose this
fine,
must just work.
Okay.
So if it doesn't work, then tough luck. Okay, so my name is Johan van Biljon. We've got a company called Intaba Environmental Services. So we started up in 2011 with the idea to make conservation practical. So it's similar to the other presentations. So we had an idea of doing natural gardens and restoration projects, because restoration, as we've heard already, restoration on its own can't, it's almost impossible to make a living just from that. Well, it's very difficult anyways. So we decided we've got some understanding of local gardens and landscape design and architecture and things like that. So we'll just combine these two. So on the screen, you'll see there's a garden that we did. So that one was, it's almost a year old, and it was quite interesting. So that's all vegetation, which is rough, it's all indigenous, but a lot of the vegetation is specifically from this area. And this one was in the Tulbagh area. So we often try to do gardens like that, but it's not, the gardens aren't necessarily all puristic. Some of it doesn't work. So we don't really have a lot of big trees in our local vegetation. So that's that slide. And then with the diversity that we've got with the Western Cape, it's quite incredible. There's such a different amount of soils and different slopes and all sorts of things. It's quite nice because there is local indigenous vegetation that's well adapted to most of those circumstances. Because then we also do rehab stuff. So this is a dam wall that we did some years ago, which were fairly big. Then on the right hand side, there's a riparian, the restoration project we did. That's also a couple of hectares. Yeah, so that was quite interesting. So when we started that, we had a lot of criticism in the beginning to say, oh, but you're throwing money away and throwing money into the river and all of those type of nonsense comments. But anyways, it was quite incredible to see what happened. We went through quite a severe drought with day zero and all of those stuff, and the vegetation was fine. And then we had big floods, and we had serious erosion above the site, and we had serious erosion below the site. But the site where we planted and stuff had almost no erosion. So it was quite interesting to see how that happens, and how some of the people that are often critical just look at things from a slightly different angle then. So now I'm just going to explain a little bit about the project that we've done and still working on it at a farm called Uitkyk. So with this farm, it was quite a different, with this farm, it was a bit of a different situation. So the landowner said he's got a big area that he wants to plant, and he wants to have it as close to natural as possible. So the whole debate was about, okay, what is natural? So if okay, let's start with like almost like a research type of project on the specific farm. So we had a look at the historical information. So there was a lot of old stone tools on the site, or we were expecting to find them. The one with the blue background, that was one of the stone tools that we found when we were actually starting. So we were expecting to find that. So these people ate a lot of wild bulbs and things, and a lot of hunter-gatherers. So the hunter-gatherers refer to that which is linked to the vegetation, is that there must have been palatable grasses. Some of the places around that area is just dominated by renosterbos. That's just a disturbed form of renosterveld. It's not supposed to look like that. Anyway, so that was the earlier phase. There we also knew about the old Khoikhoi kraal that was close by. The Khoikhois had herds of cattle, and they were migrational. So we knew that there was obviously food. So again, it points to there wasn't only renosterbos. So it all points to the idea that there was a big grass component historically, which this early painting doesn't really do a good job out of it. Yeah, anyways. And then from there on, some more history about that farm. We see that the first two farmers had a big cattle component to the agricultural activities, and then suddenly it disappeared. There was a big fire that burnt the main house and whatever, which was also quite interesting because it's the same fire rhythm that still plagues that area now. It comes from a certain area and it swept through. So we saw there was that big fire in the 70s. And then after these two farmers, it seems to have been quite a booming business. And then the cattle weren't sustainable anymore. But so like, okay, what's going on here? And one of the theories is that they overgrazed. So the cattle were just too long on one place. The grass couldn't make seeds, and that was kept on going for a couple of years. And then a big fire came, and the grass were grazed again and again. And eventually, they died off. So yeah, so we had the idea that there was a bigger grass component. Then we started looking into the actual sites, what was going on there. We compare all the different vegetation maps, geological maps, and rainfall maps, and the sunlight and wind, and all sorts of maps. That would give us an idea of where to start looking for a reference site, keeping in mind that this grazing regime is going to mess things up quite a bit. But that will just give us an idea where to start looking. And then we formed the INAT WhatsApp group. INAT project, and then so we can see the area where we think would be a relatively good reference site. So this is just photos of the reference site, all the different IDs that's been made. Things. Then we got a whole bunch of soil samples. We got soil samples, so this you'll see it's old vineyards. So the whole project is based on creating massive corridors between the vineyards for various reasons. So we got soil samples from all of these locations, and then we also got soil samples which are not indicated in the listing on our reference sites. So we were able to compare what is the natural soil condition and what is the current soil condition on the site. So there was all sorts of changes that we had to make 2 years ago to get that into the right condition. Also control burn in the process. And yeah, so once we knew the plants that we were planning to plant, seeds were collected in scales. So we went for seeds per hectare and 3 plants per square meter. And that's generally small plants in trays. So that's a lot of plants and a lot of clean seeds. The seeds were cleaned in all the different ways, and those which are bird distributed were treated with acid and smoke treated, and all the different ways that one can treat seeds. And so this is just one or two of the photos of the nursery where we're growing plants. The plants on the right hand side in the front that you'll see there's succulents and things. So that wasn't the microstigma stuff doesn't belong there. So that's for other stuff. But it's just the idea, just to give you an idea of what it looks like. So there's just a photo. The one on the left was when we started planting. That was in April. We started planting, and then a couple of months later, a team started weeding. So you can imagine agricultural fields are just full of weeds and weed seeds. So we just focused on a couple of key weed species. Because we sowed in so densely, in time the indigenous seeds will take over, and we'll cross the threshold. So yeah, that's my short little talk. You can have a look on our website. We're supposed to update our website. There's a lot of information that we can actually add there, which we haven't done yet. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Johan. Yeah, also nice, good work that you shared with us there. So wishing you guys all the best, and yeah, you certainly don't take on small scale projects. So your projects are usually of a significant or sizable scale. I don't see any. There's one question possibly, Johan, if I can just alert you to it. So Michael made a comment saying that taking regenerated landscape as synonymous with a natural landscape, to what extent is this compatible with a productive landscape? So of course, getting it back to a certain state and that function is important. But if I could just ask that you maybe respond to Michael's question in the chat. But I also want us to go over to Sue, because we are running a bit tight for time. So Sue is dialing in from Prince Albert, and Sue has started many years ago the Renew Karoo restoration nursery, and Sue is certainly an expert in arid landscape restoration. Sue, we look forward to what you are going to share with us from the more arid parts of the country, and specifically also about that vegetation type. I don't know, Sue, if you can switch on your camera and bring up your presentation.
Can you see my presentation?
I can see your video, so not your presentation yet. I think I'll just ask Madeleine to assist.
Yeah, in the middle of the screen, Sue, there's a big green button. Click on that.
Okay.
And then you will see your PowerPoint, a preview of your PowerPoint. Perfect.
Okay.
Now just go full display and all is good to go. So just say play from beginning or start from beginning. Just there at file, and then from beginning, yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
So you can see us now.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Right. So I'm presenting something about bringing life back to land, but in very arid Karoo, so different from the last 3 seminars we've watched. This presentation is by myself. I'm mainly a researcher, and I work through Wolverkraal Conservation and Research Organization, and I'm working together with Bertus Fourie, that you can see here, who is the practical side of the work. He runs Renew Karoo Nursery, and he carries out restoration for clients and also collects seed and grows plants for restoration, as well as for landscaping and for sale. So this short talk covers 3 things: the types of damage we find in arid Karoo veld and how long it lasts, the types of restoration trials we've carried out and the problems we've had, both returning palatable species to the veld and revegetating bare ground, and then finally a conclusion. So what happens to veld when it's grazed is that the veld changes, and one tends to get dominance by very unpalatable plants through grazing, because grazing is always selective. Alternatively, if the main problem is trampling or engineering activities, clearing of vegetation, then what happens usually is total loss of plants, followed by wind and water-driven soil erosion. So you need different methods to bring back vegetation in these two scenarios. What you can see on the screen now is the result of grazing that happened between 1840 and 1960. You see a fence line indicated by the orange arrows there. And in the foreground, there has been no domestic livestock for 60 years. So obviously withdrawing animals from the veld doesn't restore the land. And one has to actually do something in order to bring the plants back. Now, this is incredibly challenging under rainfall well below 200 millimeters a year. And we've tried all sorts of methods to achieve it. The other types of damage are, as I explained, trampling, and this is very similar to clearing vegetation or to engineering activities which crush or remove plants. And this particular patch you see is an old cuckoo or Khoi sand kraal, and it dates way back before the 1800s, and it's remained bare. It's about 20 meters diameter. There's no vegetation there at all, maybe a few scattered plants. And bringing vegetation back in that situation is different from trying to restore plants which have been lost, but where there is still some vegetation. So damage in this arid karoo is very, very long-lived. Now, the first type of trials I'm going to talk about are how to bring palatable plants back to vegetation where palatable plants have been lost and unpalatable plants have taken over. So this is all about changing composition, deletions and additions. We carried out some experiments in around 1996 where the veld was dominated either by Tyronia pallens, a very poisonous plant, or by kraalbos, which is also highly unpalatable. And we realized that these plants, because they're dominant, compete for water with any other plants you try to sow in. The sowing in is indicated there by S's. And so in order to get other kinds of plants back, one needs to do some damage. One needs to remove some of the plants that have established and are unpalatable to livestock. So we tried ripping and we tried manual thinning. And this worked very well in Tyronia pallens veld. On the left there, you see veld that was ripped. You see some years later, about 6 years later, and you can see this much more diversity where some of the unpalatable plants were removed just because there was more water available when it rained for other plant species. We had also sown into that veld. But we did exactly the same thing in veld dominated by kraalbos on a sandier soil, and that was an absolute disaster. All that happened is the kraalbos came up from the soil-stored seed bank and became much more dense than previous, and none of the seeds we sowed in either didn't germinate or they didn't survive. Now let me talk about restoration trials to try to revegetate bare ground. Over the last 20 years, we've tried doing trials on a variety of different soil types, deep soils, which are either sandy or clay, and skeletal soils, in other words, rocky ground where there's virtually no soil whatsoever. So here is what we did in 2016 on deep silty or sandy soil. You can see it was pretty bare to start off with. We brought in a large team of Saasveld students, and what they did is they packed brush. They developed hollows into which they packed brush. They built brush fences, and some years later, 8 years later, in fact, those hollows had established patches of vegetation. Some of the plants were derived from seeds that we sowed in, and others found their own way to the hollows. The hollows, of course, trap water, and there was shelter provided by the mulch. And of course, animals come in to graze those patches, and their dung brings in additional plant species. The fences also worked, but as you see, the success is only where there were obstacles or traps that either catch water or catch seeds. So basically, this method worked very well on deep, silty or sandy soil. This method we tried again, and working with endangered wildlife trust near Loxton, and here the soil conditions were completely different. It was a very, very heavy clay soil, dry most of the time, but completely waterlogged when it rained. And what happened when it rained is that the plants and the seeds which had been planted in the hollows simply drowned. And in the winter, because of the high altitude, many of them frosted. The soils were also extremely saline. So the lessons learned here is it's much more difficult to establish plants on bare ground if the ground is clay rather than sand or silt. You have to be extremely careful about your plant selection. If you're working on saline soils, salty soils, you can only really work with halophytes. Hollows can drown plants, so particularly when drainage is poor, the hollows should be shallow, and you should plant the plants on the walls and plant in a mild season rather than the extremes of summer and winter. Then, as I told you, we also tried to establish plants on rocky ground where there was virtually no soil. And that's how it looked for starters. And we again had large teams of students doing the brush packing and digging hollows. And this is how it looked 6 years later. Virtually nothing had happened except that some annual plants had established on the brush packed areas in the hollows. These had very poor drainage because of the rocky ground, and very little established on them 7.5 years later. So we tried something else more recently. We got capsules of facies. Now, facies have extremely small seeds, and those are the plants which probably originally dominated this bare rocky ground. And we simply broke the capsules off the plants and we strewed them on the ground. Now, some of the ground where we sowed the capsules had a thin covering of annual grasses, some was quite rocky, and some had been brush packed. And a year later, what we found is we had dozens of little facie seedlings, and even though only about 5% of these survived the first year, that was a huge advance on previous attempts to establish plants on rocky ground. The emergence and survival was far better where there were some traps, where there were no traps in the form of stones or annual plants. Most of the facie capsules simply blew away. Here's an overview of all the different types of rehab trials we've done over the last 20 years with some indication of what works and what doesn't work. So brush packing under most circumstances works very well, so long as it's low density and so long as there's good contact between the brush and the ground. Seeding generally works so long as you match the species to the site and the soil. Hollows can work, but they're not good for small seeded plants because these drown. That means the facies don't work well in hollows. And hollows don't work on clay soils. Adding plants, well, that's very expensive. If you've got the time and you've got the money, then adding plants is good, except in these very, very arid areas, the chances of follow-up rain means a high proportion of the plants are probably going to die before it rains. Watering, we find, is not a good idea. It increases competition from annual weeds, which outcompete the long-lived arid adapted Karoo plants. Doing nothing, you achieve nothing. There's no change whatever. Mulching can be good in some circumstances, but if you're trying to re-establish facies, it's a very bad idea because the seedlings can't get through the mulch. Ripping, particularly on heavy soils, tends to channel water, and you also destroy the remnant vegetation. So we don't think that's a very good approach in arid Karoo. Addition of nitrogen, we think, is a bad idea because, again, it encourages annual weeds and ephemerals, and when it does rain, these plants use up the water and outcompete the perennials. And then finally, livestock present on the land is generally bad for restoration. So here in pictures, it shows you that hollows can work, particularly on deep and friable soils, and brush packing works very well nearly always. Hollows sometimes work if the drainage is good. Too much brush is not good because it excludes light. What doesn't work on heavy soils is ripping. Too much brush packing's bad, and grazing of recently rehabilitated areas damages any attempts to restore them, particularly in arid areas. So in conclusion, one type of restoration approach does not work in all cases. We're seeing more and more damage caused by development of infrastructure in the Karoo, wind farms, solar farms, roads on guest farms and tourism sites. And in order to restore these things, we feel that we need to do a lot more trials, a lot more practical work, and we have a really long way to go at this stage. If you have any questions that relate to plant propagation, seed collection, and sowing, please address them to Bertus rather than myself. Thanks.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you for sharing those many years of dedicated hard work in the Karoo and all the different approaches and subtleties that one needs to take into account for restoring the Karoo or the fragile Karoo ecosystems. I don't see any questions in the chat for the moment, but we'll let you know if anything pops up. Bertus, I don't know if you want to share something just quickly about the nursery space and what your fieldwork and practical side of things basically entails.
Hi. So the nursery is a multifunctional nursery. So we have actually two nurseries. The one is for the public, and the other one is next to Wolvekraal Nature Reserve. So that's where we do propagation. So yeah, I think we pride ourselves in diversity of plants. Local Karoo plants first, and then we have a bit of Renosterveld from the local area, and some other indigenous plants as well. So we're trying to incorporate it into public gardens in Prince Albert. We sometimes do wholesale orders. We usually try to collect as much local material if it's a big project. So we mix restoration, conservation, and horticulture basically together. So we do our own thing. We don't really follow the normal horticultural industry. So yeah, and we always add to our species list. And we don't really plant into restoration sites. It's a bit difficult. So yeah, we got a road permit, collection permit for seeds. We got a few seed plots that people in town with Leeuwater sponsor us to use. So we have a deep sand plot, a deep clay plot, and more of a rocky plot. So we try to I think Johan visited us a few years ago. So that's plants that we're establishing for seed collection, because when it's very dry, we can't collect much seed outside in the veld or on the verges. So it's also trying to add more diversity to our seed selections. So yeah, so we combine everything together, and it's run from the nursery.
Apart from
Sounds great.
doing trials on our nature reserve, Bertus is also been asked by various residents to put natural vegetation onto vacant urban in the village. So that's almost like urban conservation, but without the problems we heard about earlier. And that's been very interesting, and it's got people wanting to try to return felt in the urban area here.
So we have a new concept, and we're trying for people to bring the felt back to your garden. So it's a bit of a no for the landscapers. They think we crazy with that idea, but I think it's catching on. And I think if more people like Corné doing urban landscaping as restoration is to actually educate people of what was there before, and trying to make it look natural, and people do appreciate it after a while. So with us, it gets very dry. So a typical felt garden in the Karoo doesn't look pretty. But if you add diversity to it and educate the people what you're putting back, you start creating interest, and people follow trends. So I think definitely local indigenous gardens can be a trend for towns and different vegetation types in the future. But we're competing with a difficult industry which promotes alien plants and exotics and roses. So getting that through to the public is not an easy task. Yeah.
We have had colleagues who've done surveys on some of the felt gardens that Bertus has produced, and they found a remarkable diversity of bees, butterflies, and other insects on what were absolutely bare patches of urban before the felt garden was developed.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, Bertus, for sharing that with us. Lots of work to do in terms of education and growing capacity and awareness in the public, or the general public rather. Sue, also thank you very much for your contributions and for sharing those insights. There's quite a few positive comments in the chat on what people are taking from this webinar. So on that note, I just want to say thank you also to Johan from Intaba Environmental Services, Corné and Aileen also. You guys can switch on your video and just wave goodbye for this evening. We are slightly over time, but not too bad. And then I just want to remind everyone of the next BOTSOC webinar will be Thursday, the 25th of September. That one will be hosted by Cherise Viljoen again. So please join us on the next webinar Thursday, as usual, the last Thursday of the month, sorry, I should say. And then it's a big weekend also for BOTSOC. We have our annual or our AGM on Saturday, and we invite all BOTSOC members to attend the AGM on Saturday. You will find full details on the BOTSOC website under the AGM tab, so please take a look. But everyone, enjoy your evening. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you on the next BOTSOC webinar.